So hey everyone, and in this video we are going to start our operations in MongoDB. So basically in any skill which you'll learn in future, or if you are learning MongoDB, you mostly have four important operations. If you pick anything in your life, you basically have four basic operations. Either you create something, either you read something, either you update something, or you delete something. Very basic. So if you're trying to learn something, you must need these four operations, right? So first of all, today we are going to start with the create part, then the read part, then we'll also learn about the update and delete part in the upcoming videos. So this would be a very good journey, and I would be covering everything which you would need to learn to actually perform these operations into your backend. So first of all, we'll be performing this operation in MongoDB shell. Then later on, we'll be performing the same operations in future using Node.js, right? So now guys, let's continue. And the very first thing which I wanted to tell you is very basic thing which you must have a clarity. So what I'll do is I'll just explain you by just drawing some figures, and I'll just say that we have at the top level, we actually have a database. Okay, so what's exactly a database? So database is actually a collection. Okay, actually a collection of collections. Okay, so database is what? A collection of collections. What is a collection? We have already covered this, but still, first of all, let me just write this. So database, what's exactly database? Database contains many collections. Suppose you have a collection of users, okay, where you would be having all your users registered in your database. Second would be, suppose, products. So you can see that we have different collections. Okay, so database is actually a collection of collections, right? And the third thing can be, like, for example, vehicles. Okay, vehicles, like that. Okay, so you can have endless number of collections in a single database. If I talk about MongoDB, okay, I'm not being talking about all the kinds of databases, but if I talk about MongoDB, that's database language, database query skill which you are learning. So if I talk about MongoDB, okay, so I'll just write here, I'm talking only about MongoDB. I'm not talking about any other database language. Okay, so if I talk about MongoDB, in MongoDB we have a database, and inside database we have multiple collections. Okay, so we actually have some collections. Okay, so let me just draw some lines here so that we can easily identify. So this is what? This is a collection of collections. Okay, database is a collection of collections, right? So now suppose this is your collection, user. Okay, user is your collection, right? So inside this you would be having what? Different users. What are these? These are actually documents. Okay, so what's exactly this? This is what? This is a collection. Okay, this is known as a collection. This is known as a database. This is known as a collection. This is also a collection. This is also a collection, right? Now inside a particular collection you would be having endless number of documents. Any number of users can exist, right? So you would be having some user, so you would be having a JSON object. This would be your, suppose, user one with some details, name, age, phone number. This would be your second user. This is actually known as what? This is known as a document. Okay, and in MongoDB it's actually a JSON object. Okay, a document is actually a JSON object, and we have already covered this. Now I hope you know these things, right? So our first job is to create this database. Okay, so I would want to create this database. So we have a create operation. Okay, let me just change the color. We actually have a create operation. You would be creating a database. So I would create a database. Then you don't need to update the database because you would be updating these fields directly, right? You would be adding these fields later on. So create and delete operation. Okay, delete operation, we basically perform these two operations directly on our database. Then if I talk about collection, we would be again performing the same operations, that is create and delete a collection. Now if I talk about object, Here we would be performing four main operations. Either you would be suppose registering a user, that is create. Either you would be reading the data of that user or multiple users, so that's known as the read operation. Either you would be updating fields like password of that user or age or phone number like that, so for that we have update operation. Either you would be deleting that user from your collection, right, from your collection. So if you want to remove that user from your platform, for those cases you would be having the delete operation, right? So these are kinds of operations which you would almost have. And into this, create is very easy, creating something is very easy, but reading is a bit complicated because you would be having thousands of users, and how you would be reading a particular user or multiple users, that matters. Then we have one more important one, that is the update one. So read and update are very important, and delete is very easy. You just need to find that user and delete that. Okay, so one more important thing in MongoDB, if I suppose talk about a database can be created very easily. We'll see that also a collection can be created very easily, just like a database. But if I talk about an object or document, if I create a document inside a collection, that is, suppose if I want to suppose register a user, so I would be just in the front end I would be creating a registration form. That registration data would be sent to the backend would be forwarding it to what, to MongoDB, right? So you would be actually saving that user into the users collection. So here automatically what you would send, suppose you want to create a user, okay, I'm talking about creating a user. That means if I talk about create a document, okay, I'm not talking about database or collection, so I'm talking about create a document, right? So document. So here guys, what you would exactly do is, so from front end, suppose you have a front end page. From your front end page, you took name, suppose you took name, email and password of that user, right? You have a registration form and you took these three details. What you would do is you would send this data from front end to your backend, okay, through an API, which we would learn in the backend part of this series, right? So you would be sending that data to backend. So now backend has what? Backend has these details. So name, email, password, and the backend would be saving it to MongoDB database. Okay, so this is your database of MongoDB, right? So backend would be saving it to your MongoDB, but the data would be actually saved first of all in this JSON object. Okay, that means a document would be created into your collection, users collection. And first of all, MongoDB would be auto generating an ID. ID would be some unique number or sequence of number and alphabets, which would actually allow you to verify this user, find that user uniquely. Okay, so that you can easily identify. Just providing that ID, you can easily find that specific user's data, right? So an automatic an ID would be generated by MongoDB. You don't need to do that. And along with that, your details like which you provided, name, something, then email, which would be also something, and also the password. Again, the password would be saved in hashed format, which we would see in our Node.js part how it's exactly saved. But yeah, password would also be saved in your database into hash format, not a normal format. Like suppose you provided a password hj123, suppose your password was hj123, so you would be first of all hashing this to some unique sequence. For this we have bcrypt in Node.js, we'll learn that later on. So some hash sequence like xyz 1 2 3. This is actually a hash format, which simply is a unique format which hackers can't easily identify, right? So that's actually hashing, which we learn that in the Node.js part, right? So in this format actually your document would be saved and ID would be auto generated, right? So I hope you understood very basic rule of create. That means ID would be auto generated. That is very important because ID would actually help us to, first of all, when you want to get a user data, you will be providing the ID into your query, and from that specific ID you can get the data of the complete user, that means complete document. Similarly, if you want to update something, if you want to delete something, you would be needing an ID. Okay, so this would be the ID. Okay, this would be the ID to whom you want to get the data or create the data or update the data or delete the data. ID really matters, right? Now let's continue. So I hope you understood this. And obviously, if suppose I already have a user, suppose now I just registered this user with this ID, okay? I registered this user with this ID. Suppose if I retry to add a new user, but I provide same ID by myself, okay? I can provide an ID by myself from Node.js, that means from my backend, I can provide an ID. But the ID must be always unique. Suppose if I add a new user, but I provide the ID same as this one, so MongoDB would actually reject that, okay, reject that request because ID would always be unique. So we'll see that later on, but yeah, just a clear explanation, that is ID would always be unique when you are saving your objects into your collection, right?